scandal. Let's go to some of the stories inside the papers. And joining me to do that is Sophia Worringer, researcher and political commentator with Young Voices UK. Sophia, good morning.
Good morning, Rosie.
I just mentioned that story with Terry there, but front page of the Times says, look, judges are urged to get tough with Just Stop Oil protesters. What does get tough actually mean? What is the appropriate punishment for someone who demonstrates and protests in this way?
Well, I think sentences should be tougher. Those who held up the Dartford crossing, one of them got up to 3 years in prison, which is, I think, a lot longer than they expected. And I think that it is important that these sentences act as a deterrent. I think they have done. In fact, those tactics have shifted now away from holding up roads in quite the same way, although they do these go slow walks, that I think it is important that they make these sentences something that will put people off, because this is impacting not just Parliament, who can actually change the laws, but normal people going about their daily life who have no power at all to change the laws that Just Stop Oil want changing. And it's not fair that they're brought in to this conversation in a way that impacts their daily lives. So I do think the sentences should be tough in a way that it makes Just Stop Oil and other protesters think about whether this is the best course of action.
Yeah, so at this meeting between police chiefs and Number 10, the police said, look, since we toughened up on the sentencing, there haven't been any major Just Stop Oil protests on roads that have caused significant disruption. But as you mentioned, Sophia, that means they've just sort of changed tactic. How long should you be sentenced if you, let's say, go on to court 18 and throw a jigsaw around and confetti and stop the game?
I think it's interesting because this is more than just the impact it has on that particular game. Obviously, it's not fair on the sports people who have trained hard to be there. It's not fair on the spectators who've paid a lot of money to be there. But it's wider than that. So this is why I think the sentences should be tougher, because it's also about Britain's perception and their position in the world. Whether people think that they can hold sporting events there without being interrupted will impact the country's ability to host games and to attract sponsorship. So it's about our standing and our reputation. And that's very difficult to quantify. So I do think, obviously dependent on circumstances, but I do think that there should be the ability to pass fairly tough sentences on these protesters.
I remember with Extinction Rebellion, there was a bit of an own goal moment when some demonstrators got on top of a tube and they disrupted public transport in such a dramatic way. And people thought, isn't this what you want us to be using, taking the tube? I wonder if you think the demonstration that wasn't explicitly by Just Stop Oil, even though they sort of enjoyed the speculation that it was them as a demonstrator threw orange confetti over George Osborne and his then wife as they left their wedding. That seems to have, people who were sort of frustrated by Just Stop Oil, that seems to have upped the rhetoric to the point where people say, well, we've kind of got no sympathy with your strategy anymore.
Yeah, they've done themselves absolutely no favours. Whether they were behind it or not, they've thanked and applauded that woman's efforts at throwing confetti. And it's such a low approach to tackle someone on their wedding day, just as they are leaving the church. I don't think anyone in their right mind is really behind that. If they want credible change, if Just Stop Oil want to see credible change, they need to engage in credible methods and to propose solutions that mean people can take them seriously. And this is not one of them. You can't take anybody seriously who's disrupting somebody's wedding.
The Times have got an interesting piece on the wedding saying centrist dance to Osborne tunes, talking about the guest list, saying the former Chancellor's wedding party was a bit of a throwback to coalition days.
Yeah, I don't think it does much for the idea that this was a government run by friends. And I guess it shows in a positive light how much cross-party working was possible. I know there were Labour MPs and former Lib Dem MPs in attendance, as well as journalists and others. But I do think that it makes you wonder how much...
Oh, I've just lost Sophia. Let's see if we can re-establish connection. Sophia, are you there? Maybe a Wi-Fi problem.
I am. Hello.
Oh, brilliant. Yeah, carry on.
It makes you wonder how much difference there is between those political parties if they can be so chummy at weddings. You know, what were they disagreeing in when they were in government? And I think the public...
Oh, you can be friends with the opposition, though, can't you?
Of course, you can be friends. But if there's no disagreement at all, I wonder if the public are a bit frustrated about how much choice they have between the parties if they seem to kind of jolly on like nothing's happened as soon as they get out.
What can you imagine the dance floor? You've got Ed Balls there, Matt Hancock, Sajid Javid. It looked, I can imagine, like a bit of a riot. Someone said it was a bit of a throwback to the coalition years and the Remain campaign, one guest said. So it seems like the supposed demonstration, even though Just Stop Oil said it didn't have anything to do with them, didn't put a dampener on the partying. Should we talk about a meeting today that's going to be a little bit more awkward than it could have been? The Times leading article describes the visit today by Joe Biden to meet Rishi Sunak as a chilly visit. This is at a time when both parties want there to be warmer relations between the UK and the US.
Yeah, and I think Rishi will go in very diplomatically. The Prime Minister is very good at these kind of bilateral conversations and will want that relationship to be warm, and it will bring that warmth. I think the main disagreement, as far as I can understand, is around these cluster bombs. And I do think the Prime Minister is right to hold the line there. You can't be asking for something that you have as a country campaigned to stop the use of, which is the case for these cluster bombs. And I think the President of the United States will understand that. They obviously have not signed the treaty that the UK is beholden to, so they have a different position and they can act independently. But I do think the Prime Minister will be able to bring warmth to that relationship, which is very important, obviously, for the safety of the world, in fact. And I think the Prime Minister needs to bring that warmth, and he will.
Mm. We'll have more analysis, I'm sure, on how that visit goes this time tomorrow. Lots of former politicians are having their 2 pence, really, about Rishi Sunak's Stop the Boats plans. First of all, we've got on the front page of The Telegraph, deporting migrants to Rwanda is the only way to stop the small boats illegally crossing the channel. That's Lord Clark, the former Home Secretary. And then also we've got inside the Daily Mail, Stop the Boats. It's more difficult than it looks, mocks Priti Patel. What do you make of these people who formerly had a lot of sway in how to make decisions here? Their analysis on how the Prime Minister's faring.
So I think this intervention from Lord Clark is interesting because he's hardly a far-right Conservative. And if he's saying that this intervention is necessary, he knows the workings of the Home Office, being former Home Secretary himself. He knows the difficulties and the challenges. And he's saying that this is the only way to stop the boats. And what he's proposing is the right one. He's saying, yes, you may not like all the details of this policy, but what is the alternative? And the alternative is that we had almost 1,000 individuals crossing the channel this weekend. And it is so dangerous. And sadly, there have been deaths in that attempt. So something needs to be done. And even if the Rwanda policy isn't perfect, at least it is trying to move towards a solution. And as Lord Clark said, what is the other solution? And obviously, Priti Patel has skin in this game. She was previously holding this brief and found it difficult to bring the change she wanted. And I think the government is right to push forward, because when you speak to people in the constituencies, this is an issue they really care about. And I think the government is right to take drastic action on this and keep pushing to see change in this area.
And the question is, can they? Because as we know, there's sort of legal complexities, and it's been caught up in legal problems every time they've tried to pursue this cause of action. And also an admission from the government that it's not going to be one strategy. They're going to need multiple different sort of ways to tackle this issue. The final thing I want to mention, Sophia, is in the Daily Mail, civil servants are demanding the right to carry out their jobs from overseas, but ministers are resisting the move to work from the beach. The sort of idea of being the digital nomad hasn't quite managed to seep in the way that maybe some who work in government or the civil service would like.
Well, no one could work from the beach, can they? It's far too sandy, far too hot, and there's sea waiting for you when you could be working. I do think that civil servants are just that. They are servants of the crown, of the government, and they need to be there in their offices, in the country that they're serving. Ministers may call upon their advice any time. They can't be at a beach. And this is taxpayers' money paying their wages, let's not forget. So if you want another job where you can work nomadically around the world and have that flexibility, there are plenty of companies that will allow you to do that. But if you're working for the government on taxpayers' money, you should not be at the beach. You should be in the country at which you're serving.
Yeah, so what basically happened is in COVID, they sort of relaxed rules and policy requirements for civil servants carrying IT equipment and working in other countries. But they've said those rules have since had to be tightened up again, maybe for the best. Sophia, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it. That is Sophia Worringer, researcher and political commentator with Young Voices UK. Very